The silent one in Corridor 7. The shuttle drifted through cold space, a silver vein pulsing through the black between stars. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. Diplomatic missions were never this silent, not even during peace talks with war-torn species. Not even when the survivors of Nova 6 came aboard, still shaking, still bleeding. Silence like this meant something worse was waiting. Something unseen. Ambassador Keith was human, but nobody called him that. They called him the Silent One. He sat alone in Corridor 7 reading a small book with torn corners and faded ink. No one ever saw him eat. No one saw him sleep. He spoke only when he had to, and even then, his voice was like static whispering through broken glass. It made even the most powerful species uneasy. He shouldn't have been there. The shuttle's diplomatic council was made up of 22 members from 11 planets. Humans were never given a seat. Never officially. But something changed, too. Cycles ago, humans had survived what the Galactic Core called the Sorrow Wave, and no one could explain how. No records. No screams. Only silence. And now, a single human had been sent. No one knew by whom, wearing no symbols, no armor, carrying only that tiny book and a dull piece of metal that looked like a broken tool. On the 4th day of the journey, Lady Varaxa of the Zilanthar demanded his removal. "He is unclean," she hissed to the others, her voice like velvet soaked in venom. "He carries no sigil, no proof of oath, and yet sits in the corridor where our gods once walked." "No one," answered her. They had seen how he moved without sound, like a shadow that didn't belong to any light. He had not raised his voice, not even when the children of Lexer spilled boiling sap across his boots. He simply wiped them clean. No anger, no pain, just silence. But Varaxa was not afraid. Not yet. She walked down Corridor 7 on the 6th day, her golden blades folded behind her like wings. She smiled when she saw him sitting there, still reading that book. "You will leave this corridor," she said, stepping close enough to see her reflection in his dark eyes. "You offend the sacred, you mock our gods." The human looked up, slowly. His gaze was soft, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said. "Do you know their names?" She blinked. "Whose names?" "Your gods." Her smile faltered, just a flicker. "The names are forbidden. Only the high priest speaks them, and only under stars aligned in blood." He closed the book gently, then held up the dull metal in his hand. "That's what I thought," he whispered. She laughed, a high, cruel sound. Her blades unfolded with a hiss of heat. "You threaten me with that? A piece of scrap?" "No," he said, still calm. "I warn you." Something shifted then, not in the corridor, but in the air around it. A sound, or the memory of one, hummed like a distant choir made of teeth. The lights flickered, her blades trembled. And somewhere deep in the shuttle, the engines stuttered, just once. "You have no place on this vessel," she spat, stepping forward. He stood. It was the way he stood that changed everything. No one remembered seeing him rise. One moment he was seated. The next he was towering in front of her. Not taller than her in size, but larger somehow. Like he carried weight that didn't belong to flesh or bone. "I warned you," he said again. "You walked too far." "You are nothing," she whispered. He reached out, not to strike her, not to threaten. He only touched the wall beside him. A low groan moved through the shuttle like a throat clearing before it screamed. And suddenly the lights above turned red. Not emergency red. Ritual red. And then the shuttle spoke. Not with a voice from any known system. It was older. A language that was felt more than heard. Something beneath meaning. Everyone on the ship heard it. In their own minds. And they all understood the same 3 words. He has returned. Panic exploded. Alarms failed. Doors locked themselves. Systems reverted to manual. The oldest of the diplomats fell to their knees, shaking, their bodies remembering things their minds had never known. Varaxa stumbled back, her golden blades collapsing into ash. "What are you?" She gasped. The human looked down at the metal in his hand. They called it a weapon, he said, but it was always just a key. And then the walls began to bleed. It started slow, like condensation. Black-red liquid dripping from panels, pooling on the floor. The scent of burnt ozone and ancient tombs filled the air. Something behind the walls was waking. And it was angry. Ambassador Keith turned and walked back to his spot on the floor. Sat down. Opened his book. "You should not have touched me," he said softly. Varaxa tried to run, but the hallway stretched, became longer, darker. Her steps grew slower, like she was sinking into something that didn't want her to leave. And then she heard them. The gods she claimed to worship, but they weren't singing. They were begging. The hall that stretched too far. No one saw Lady Varaxa again. Not really. Her screams echoed for exactly 7 hours, 42 minutes, and 6 seconds. After that, the sound turned into something else. Not silence. Something worse. Like a lullaby made of knives. Like breathing through a broken throat. No one dared go down Corridor 7. Even the shuttle's artificial mind rerouted cleaning, drones to avoid that passage. And still, the red lights pulsed. Slow. Steady. Like a heartbeat waiting to stop. Ambassador Keith remained seated. And he read. The book, now soaked at the corners with the corridor's new tears, never left his hands. His face never showed fear. Not even as the blood of the gods began to whisper from the walls. The council held emergency meeting after emergency meeting in Chamber 12. Every diplomat showed signs of stress. Twitching spines. Gills flaring without rhythm. Eyes unable to focus on anything longer than 3 seconds. But no one dared mention what they all felt. That something ancient had been unchained and that the human was at its center. They didn't ask what he was. They asked what he remembered. "We need to remove him," said High Speaker Thunarak, whose voice could paralyze a lesser mind. "We tried," rasped Sorminu of the Krildar. She tried. No one mentioned her name now. The very syllables of Varaxa felt like they burned the tongue, like saying it might bring her back dripping and wrong. Captain Durrell, a neutral observer from the Iron faction, slammed a steel fist on the table. "This is a human problem. The Earthlings made this thing. We send him back to them and burn the shuttle." But no one moved because they knew. He hadn't come from Earth, not anymore. Meanwhile, on Deck 11, the walls began to change. It started with whispers. A crew member heard her dead brother humming from behind a closed panel. Another one saw a window form where no window should be, and through it a sun that no longer existed. Then came the black roots. Hairline fractures in the metal, slow-moving tendrils that pulsed with soft red light. They slithered like veins, finding voices, finding memories, feeding, and all of it led back to Corridor 7. A junior technician, Lara, was ordered to scan that corridor from a distance. Her hand shook as she activated the scope, praying she wouldn't see him looking back. She didn't. She saw them. Dozens of figures. Thin. Tall. Wrong. They stood in the shadows behind the human, unmoving. Each one wore something that shimmered like robes made of broken time. Their faces were masks. No, not masks. Bones. Polished. Grinning. And their eyes bled upward. Lara dropped the scope. "There are more," she whispered. "He's not alone." Back in Corridor 7, the human closed his book. "They're ready," he said softly. The lights flickered again, but this time they didn't return. Darkness swept through the shuttle like a wave of ink, and in the dark things began to knock, not on doors, not on walls, from inside people's minds. Each diplomat saw something different. Their first sin, their greatest failure, and a door. Always a door. Behind it something hungry. And that door was unlocking. Counselor Trax of the Sehal broke first. She tried to claw out her own mind. Literally. The med drones couldn't restrain her. Not fast enough. She screamed a single phrase before her vocal cords tore apart. The dead are not dead. They just wait. And somewhere down in the engine room, the power core began to bleed. No one had ever seen that before. The engineer swore he saw it breathe. By day 8, half the shuttle was quarantined. Corridor 7 had become something else entirely. Longer, impossible. Those who looked down it from the right angle said they saw stairs descending deep, deep into nothing. One claimed they heard bells. Another smelled their mother's perfume. A third, no one ever found her body. Captain Durrell finally snapped, suited up, said he'd end this human problem himself. He went in with a weapon forged from neutron stars, designed to kill titans. He laughed on the way down, said he'd break the human's neck before lunch. He didn't come back. But his voice did. On the intercom, crying, laughing, begging. He showed me what we forgot, it said. He showed me the war we buried. He showed me what it cost. The human finally stood again on day 9, walked calmly out of Corridor 7, down the central spine, through the trembling crew, past the diplomats who didn't dare meet his eyes. He walked into Chamber 12 without knocking. Every alarm failed. Every weapon melted. You all called us dangerous, he said quietly, placing the book on the table. You said humans were unstable, emotional, primitive. No one spoke. No one breathed. You were right, he said. He opened the book. But the pages were no longer paper. They were flesh. And the words were bleeding. As the council screamed, the human whispered one final sentence before everything went red again. We remember what you forgot. And now, so will you. The gods who never died, they woke up screaming, not in their own beds, not even in their own bodies. Each member of the Galactic Council found themselves somewhere else. Someone else. Trapped inside memories they didn't recognize, voices they never spoke with, skins they'd never worn. And above all of it, the sound of pages turning. Slow, wet, patient. The book was reading them now. Speaker Thunarak opened 6 of his 8 eyes and saw fire, not the clean kind. This fire wept. It burned inside the lungs. It clung to the skin like guilt. He stood on a battlefield older than the stars, weapons made of bone and sorrow piled higher than mountains. And he was not alone. Behind him, billions screamed his name, not in worship, in accusation. He turned and saw himself, the same face, the same robes, the same blood-soaked hands, and yet, not him. This is who you were, the other him said, voice echoing in dead languages. Before you forgot what you did to survive. He tried to deny it, tried to speak, but his mouth opened only to vomit teeth. And then the stars fell from the sky like broken promises. Counselor Sorminu found herself trapped in water, not swimming, not floating, drowning, slowly, painfully, inside a glass cube that hovered above a forgotten planet. Outside, millions of her kind watched, unmoving. They were statues, frozen in perfect, lifeless horror. A memory surged through her like poison. This was the vault, the secret her ancestors hid. They had fed this place children, once, long ago, to earn silence, to buy peace. And now she was inside it, watching them come alive. They blinked, they bled, they smiled, and they said in one voice, "The human did not bring us. You did." Captain Durrell, still somehow alive, somehow human, was back in the womb. Not metaphorically, literally. He curled inside the body of his own mother, fully conscious, fully aware, unable to scream. Above him, through the thin red wall of flesh, he saw the human's face, smiling, reading. "You were the first to point a weapon at me," the voice said, "so I gave you back your beginning." His bones began to grow backwards, and he understood what mercy meant when it wasn't given. Outside the visions on the real shuttle, or what was left of it, Lara crawled through vent tunnels with bleeding fingers and silent tears. She hadn't seen another crew member in days. Only shadows, only bones, only mirrors that showed her crying in rooms she had never entered. But she kept going, because she still had one thing left. The recorder. It was cracked, dirty, but still worked, and every few minutes she whispered into it, "This is Technician Lara, Shuttle Theta 9. We are under a psychic collapse. The human is not human. He carries something that doesn't belong in this galaxy. If you receive this, do not answer. Do not come, do not pray, do not—" She paused, then whispered, "Do not open your eyes, because that's what got Nav Officer Jick." He opened his eyes when the whispers came, and what he saw melted his mind across the wall. Not exploded, melted. His thoughts dripping out of his skull like candle wax. On the 7th deck, Ambassador Keith stood alone, the book at his side, the dull piece of metal still in his palm. His voice, soft and clean, echoed through the ship now without wires. "I never wanted this." The shuttle shuddered. From the void outside, something knocked, not once, not twice, thrice. And every knock peeled a layer off reality. The walls turned to bone. The floor turned to breath. The windows became eyes. Not watching the stars. Watching them. Inside, the council chamber, reality stitched itself back but wrong. The council sat around the table, all of them back in their seats, but their skin had changed. Their eyes were gone, and where their mouths should be, only sealed flesh trembled with screams that could not escape. The human sat at the head of the table now. He opened the book one last time, but it wasn't a book anymore. It was a door, and it breathed. "Long ago," he said softly, "you called us monsters because we remembered what pain was. You mocked our weakness, our grief, our love." He stood. The door pulsed. But grief is power, and pain remembers. And love? He smiled as the shuttle outside flickered like a dying star. Love built weapons no god could hold. The door opened, just a crack, and something stepped through. Tall, empty, and wearing the shape of a god none of them had ever seen. But every one of them had feared. We are inside the wound now. The shuttle was no longer moving, not through space, not through time. It drifted inside something else, something that pulsed and breathed and remembered. From the outside, the stars had vanished. The black was no longer the absence of light. It was thicker, sentient, filled with eyes that did not blink, only waited. And it was cold, not the cold of vacuum, the cold of being watched by something that never learned to die. Inside, the corridors twisted. What was once steel and memory foam was now grown over with veins, real veins, wet and pulsing, like the shuttle had become part of something living and angry. Walls moved when no one touched them. Lights flickered in patterns that matched no system code. And sometimes the walls whispered your name, but not the name you used, the name you buried. Lara was still alive, still crawling. Her fingers had worn down to the bone. Her breath came in shallow, terrified gasps. Her hair had gone white. She hadn't slept in 3 days, but her grip on the recorder never loosened. "This is Technician Lara," she whispered again. "Shuttle Theta 9. Day 10. We are no longer where we were. We are inside something that used to know pain. I think it's healing. I think we're the infection." Behind her, the air shimmered. A door opened that wasn't there a second ago, not with hinges, with breath, a wet, sucking inhale. Lara did not turn. She kept crawling. She had learned by now. Don't look, don't speak, and never ever scream, because screaming gave it permission. In the command center, what remained of Captain Durrell had become part of the console. Not fused, grown in. His eyes were the warning lights. His nerves were the wires. His lungs powered the emergency systems, but not for safety, for ritual. And every 33 minutes his mouth opened and he cried out one name, Keith. But not in fear, in worship. Ambassador Keith sat calmly in Corridor 7. It had returned to what it used to be, or maybe what it pretended to be. Clean metal, dim light. The faint hum of systems that had long since stopped functioning. The book was gone now. The metal shard still rested in his hand. He stared at it like it was a grave. "You should not have called me," he said to no one. And yet, something answered, from the walls, from the blood, from the bones of the gods. "But we did," the voice whispered, "and we made you from the scream we buried." He nodded, stood, walked. The door to Chamber 12 opened without a sound, and all the gods were waiting. Not statues, not legends, but living things, and they were afraid. They remembered, the last time, they ruled, they carved obedience into the stars. They used fear as currency. They burned civilizations into ash for whispering too loudly. And then a human screamed, not out of hate, out of grief. And in that scream, something woke. Something they could not kill. The gods named it the Remnant. A being made of love so deep it shattered reality when it was broken, and Keith was its echo. The gods bowed, but it wasn't enough. Keith walked past them, toward the throne made of council chairs, each one still holding the mindless husk of a diplomat. None could move. None could speak. But all could feel. "You made monsters of us," Keith said softly. "Because we wept when we were wounded. Because we bled when we were hurt. Because we remembered what you made us do just to survive." He turned. The metal shard in his hand glowed, not with light but with remembrance, and it changed into a key, and then into a blade. But it wasn't meant to kill. Not yet. He raised it, pointed it at the gods. "Open the vault," he said. Their voices trembled. "It's sealed beyond time, buried in dead stars. Open it," he repeated. "If we do, we all die." Keith nodded once. "Then it's fair." Far below the shuttle, inside the twisted bowels of what used to be engine storage, the vault responded. The seals broke. Not with sound, with sorrow. An exhale that bent gravity, twisted light, made blood flow backwards. The vault was not a place. It was a wound. And inside, it was not dark. It was bright. So bright it hurt. A child stood there, or something that looked like one. Genderless, ageless, skin made of flame and lullabies. And it cried every second, every moment for 10,000 years. "Why did they leave me?" it asked. Keith entered the vault. The light did not blind him. He walked to the child, knelt, held out the blade. "They didn't leave you," he said. "They locked you away because you remembered how to love." The child blinked and smiled, and the universe shuddered as the gods screamed. The shuttle cracked in half. No explosion. No fire. It simply unfolded. Became a memory in motion. Something between death and dream. The crew vanished, absorbed into light, into voice, into truth, and only one sound remained, not a scream, not a roar, a lullaby, sung by something ancient, broken, beautiful, and vengeful. The song that never ends. They thought the shuttle was gone. The official report said catastrophic systems failure. The Galactic Council issued no funeral, no flags lowered, no announcements, just silence. But silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes, silence is the breath a scream takes before it begins. Because the shuttle hadn't been destroyed, it had been rewritten. And now, it was singing, not with music, with memory. Across the stars, people began to hear it. First the children. On planets far from war, in cities made of light, toddlers began humming lullabies their parents never taught them. They spoke words no one could translate. Their eyes turned dark when the songs ended. And when asked what they'd been singing, they only answered, "We dream of him." Then came the veterans, those who'd fought the old wars, the forgotten conflicts that shaped the galaxy's darkest corners. They started waking in the night, clutching weapons long decommissioned, trembling as if the enemy had returned. "He's back," whispered one old general, eyes bleeding from remembering too much. The human they locked in time. The one the gods feared. I fought beside him once. We buried the truth, and now it's digging its way out. And then came the collapse. Small at first. Temples on flame worlds, cracking open, statues of the old gods falling without wind, sacred texts rotting mid-sentence, as if the universe was redacting its lies. On the imperial throne world of Zelnor Prime, the Empress watched her star map fracture. Lines vanished. Alliances blinked out like snuffed candles, and a single word burned itself across her command screen. "Remember." She summoned her oracles. They wept, not from fear, from relief. "He has returned," one whispered, eyes white. "We were wrong to forget. We were wrong to bury him. The wound was never yours to seal." The Empress spat. "You call him savior. I call him infestation." She gave a single order. "Prepare the obliterator, a weapon not used in 12,000 years, designed to erase entire systems from existence, no matter what lived inside them." Meanwhile, in the ruins of what used to be the shuttle, something stirred, a shape, barely visible, drifting where space bent into grief. Ambassador Keith no longer needed breath. He walked across the echo of what once was, a corridor, still flickering, bleeding memories instead of blood. The child followed him, its body a pulsing glow of loss and love. And behind them both, reality stitched itself open. Not a tear, a gift. A path that stretched across dimensions, through moments that never happened, into places that feared being. "Remembered, they will try to end this," the child said. "Again." Keith nodded. "They never learned." "Are you afraid?" He smiled. "I'm human." And with that, he stepped through the final door. Zelnor's obliterator arrived, a black monolith longer than moons, hollow inside, filled with screams of failed timelines. The weapon aimed itself not at a planet, not at a fleet, but at a memory. It prepared to fire. But the memory looked back, and the weapon shook. The engineer in charge screamed as his console flooded with visions, millions of them. Whole galaxies crumbling, not from war, but from truth. Civilizations collapsing after hearing a single sentence whispered, in their sleep. He ran, but he didn't get far. The floor swallowed him, not with fire, with forgiveness. And that's when the singing began again. Not from radios, not from mouths, from space itself. A choir of lost names, a lullaby of vengeance. And then the obliterator turned, by itself, and pointed back at Zelnor Prime. The Empress watched in horror, tried to shut it down, tried to scream orders into dying machines, but the weapon had already chosen, it remembered, what they did to the child, what they erased from history. And in one instant, made of silence and sorrow, Zelnor Prime vanished, not exploded, not burned, just forgotten. Erased from every database, every mind, every map. Even the stars wept. Lara, now adrift in what remained of real space, floated in an escape pod that hadn't been there before. No food, no water, only a single datapad. On it, one message, from him. "You survived. Because you listened," she cried. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time in her life she felt seen. Beneath the message, one more line flickered in, "It's not over." And far above her, from the bleeding edge of the universe, came the voice again. Not his voice, theirs. The ones the gods had locked away. The ones who loved too hard. "We're coming home." He was the last prayer. Now he's the answer. The galaxy burned without fire. Temples turned to dust. Monuments sank into ground that no longer obeyed gravity, and across every world that had once claimed power, a song echoed, a lullaby without mercy. But it didn't come from mouths. Not anymore. It came from memory. It came from truth. The gods ran. Yes, the gods. Not myths, not symbols. Real beings. Ancient, eternal, and terrified. They fled to the old places. The deep places. Places where light had never entered. Where time twisted in knots and stars wept on their knees. But it didn't matter. The song always found them. It came through stone, through water, through their own blood. It reminded them what they had done, and more importantly, what they failed to kill. Deep beneath the dead sons of Veltara, the last pantheon gathered. They were all that remained of the architects, the ones who had shaped the galaxy from dust and hunger. And they wept. Not because they feared death, they feared memory. He wasn't supposed to wake, hissed the god of endings, his skin flaking like pages burning in reverse. We buried him in the wound, sobbed the mother of Dominion, her crown dripping molten guilt. We sealed the door with blood and song and bone. But he loved, whispered the child god who no longer had a name. And that was the truth. That was their mistake. They had forgotten what love could become when left to rot, what kindness turned into when buried in chains. Above them, in the place between time and thought, Keith floated, not alive, not dead, just awake. His body glowed faintly, shaped by grief, strengthened by purpose. The child hovered beside him, no longer crying. Its eyes were stars now. Its voice, the first sound ever spoken, long before light had a name. "They're hiding," the child said. "Then we remind them," Keith answered. He raised the blade, but it wasn't a weapon, not anymore. It was a memory, and he pointed it downward, into the depths. The last vault opened, not like a door, like an apology. Inside it was a room made of silence, and in the center, a heartbeat. Old, wounded, waiting. Keith stepped inside, and the gods screamed. They tried to stop him, unleashed all they had left. Storms that erased minds, beasts stitched from forgotten sins, screams that turned moons inside out. But nothing touched him, because he wasn't coming to destroy. He came to return something. His voice broke through their final defenses. Not loud, not angry, just honest. "You took my people. You erased our name. You mocked us when we wept, when we fell, when we bled." He knelt before the heartbeat, touched it, and spoke the name they feared most. Human. The pulse exploded, not out, inward. And the gods felt what it meant to be mortal, to hurt, to love, to lose, to hope anyway. And then, they broke. Not into pieces, into truth. Their forms melted, not in pain, but in remorse. And across the stars, those who had worshipped them looked to the sky and saw something else rising. Not fire, not light, but humanity, not as it had been, but as it was always meant to be. The echo of gods who loved too hard, the children of grief that learned to build instead of burn, the last prayer that became the answer. Lara, now old, stood beneath a violet sky. She had no idea where this world was. It had grown from the seed of the old shuttle, wrapped in the heartbeat of something lost and found. And in the center of the sky, a shape watched over them. Not a face, not a star, just the shimmer of a man reading a book beside a sleeping child. Ambassador Keith. Not dead, not gone. Remembered, and from him, the lullaby continued. But now, it healed. It rebuilt. And somewhere, far across the galaxy, a new child was born, and when she opened her mouth for the first time, she sang the song, not in fear, not in sorrow, but in love. The end.